25 people in my department tried to force me out of blue tech manufacturing. They just made one mistake. They did it 3 days before my system prevented $200 in equipment failures and saved lives on the factory floor. The first sign something was wrong wasn't the petition itself, it was the silence. 25 people in operations suddenly stopped talking when I walked past their workstations. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Computer screen switched. Someone closed a laptop a little too quickly. In most factories, silence just means people are focused on their work. In manufacturing operations, silence usually means something is already brewing behind your back. My name is Mac Powell. I'm 49 years old, and 6 months earlier, the CEO of Blue Tech Manufacturing hired me to fix a problem the company had been quietly ignoring for years. Equipment downtime, not just maintenance headaches. We're talking about machinery failures that could kill someone if they happened at the wrong time. Blue Tech held more than $200 million in active production contracts, but the deeper maintenance data told a story that kept me awake at night. Unexpected breakdowns, declining efficiency, 40-ton presses and assembly lines slowly falling apart, critical safety systems operating on borrowed time. If the trend continued, the company risked losing nearly a third of its manufacturing capacity within 2 years. Worse, someone was going to get hurt. So I built a predictive maintenance system designed to detect when equipment was about to fail weeks before it actually happened. The model didn't just track problems after machines broke down, it warned us while we still had time to fix them and keep people safe. Not everyone in operations appreciated that approach. Howard Thompson, our plant operations manager, had expected to lead the maintenance overhaul before I was hired. Every system I introduced reminded him that the promotion he wanted had gone to someone else. Howard was old school, been running things the same way for 15 years. Fix it when it breaks was his motto, and it had worked fine until now. Oliver Davis, head of quality control, had a different concern. My automation tools were quietly replacing half the inspection workflows his team had built over the last decade. Oliver saw the writing on the wall. If machines could predict their own failures, what did that mean for quality inspectors? And 3 weeks earlier, the one person who usually kept the entire company balanced had boarded a plane to Germany, CEO Bradley Whitfield. Before leaving, he paused at the doorway of my office. When I come back, he said, I want results. Before he left, Bradley placed a thin folder on my desk. Quarterly review is in 3 weeks, he said. Make sure your system is ready to explain itself. At the time, I thought he meant the technical data. Later, I realized he meant something else entirely. I intended to give him exactly that. What I didn't know yet was that someone else inside the company had already started preparing a very different outcome. Late that afternoon, unfamiliar footsteps echoed across the operations floor. When I looked up, Cassandra Whitfield, the CEO's wife and Blue Tech's VP of Human Resources, was walking directly toward my desk. The expression on her face made one thing immediately clear. This wasn't a social visit. Back in the Navy, we had a saying. When the brass shows up unannounced, someone's about to get their ass handed to them. The question was who? The first time I heard Howard Thompson complain about my system, he didn't bother keeping his voice down. It was late afternoon, and most of the operations floor had already cleared out. The glass walls of the executive conference room overlooked the production area below, a perfect setup for conversations that looked private but rarely stayed that way. I'm telling you, Howard said, pacing beside the conference table like a caged animal. He's rewriting the entire department. 25 years I've been here, and now some Navy boy thinks he can waltz in and change everything. Across from him sat Cassandra Whitfield. Elegant, composed, watching the factory floor below like a general studying a battlefield. Is that necessarily a problem? She asked, her voice calm as still water. Howard let out a short, bitter laugh. Depends who you ask. Half the crew doesn't even understand what he's building. The other half is scared they'll be out of a job. Another voice joined the conversation. Oliver Davis stepped inside carrying a tablet full of performance dashboards. It's not just confusion, he said. His system automates most of our inspection protocols, if it works the way he claims. Oliver's voice trailed off. A lot of quality control positions become redundant. Cassandra's fingers drummed lightly against the glass table. She watched the operations floor below for several long seconds. Teams moved between workstations. Diagnostic screens flickered with data streams. Conversations rose and fell across the open factory space. Finally, she spoke. So he's disrupting established operations, Cassandra said slowly, and replacing systems that people here built with their own hands. Howard nodded emphatically. Exactly. We've been doing things a certain way for decades. It works. Why fix what isn't broken? A faint smile appeared on Cassandra's face, the kind that never reaches the eyes. Then maybe the problem isn't the system, she said. Both men looked at her with sudden attention. Maybe, she continued quietly, the problem is the person running it. The idea settled into the room like a lit fuse hitting gunpowder. Within hours, Howard began making his rounds, speaking with supervisors across operations. Some were genuinely frustrated with the learning curve. Some were nervous about job security. Others simply didn't want their established routines threatened by some outsider's fancy computer programs. Oliver quietly circulated performance reports that highlighted every temporary slowdown during the system's testing phase. The numbers looked bad if you didn't understand what predictive maintenance required during implementation. By the end of the first day, 12 signatures had appeared on an informal complaint list. By the second evening, that number had grown to 25. Howard placed the printed document on the table in front of Cassandra like he was laying down a winning poker hand. "Think this will get Bradley's attention?" he asked. Cassandra glanced down at the signatures, 25 names representing nearly half the operations staff. "Oh, this won't be going to Bradley," she said, sliding the paper neatly into a manila folder. Her eyes lifted toward the operations floor where I was still working late. "Troubleshooting sensor calibrations on line 3. I'll be delivering this personally." Howard studied the names one final time, a satisfied grin spreading across his weathered face. "He won't last the quarter." The meeting invitation hit my email inbox exactly 30 minutes after Cassandra left my workstation. Subject line, Operations Division Alignment Review. No agenda attached, no explanation, just a time, date, and conference room number. In the Navy, we called this kind of setup an ambush. By the time I entered the conference room the next morning, nearly everyone from operations was already seated around the polished oak table. The energy in the room felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Conversation stopped cold the moment the door clicked shut behind me. Howard Thompson stood near the projection screen, remote control in hand like he was about to deliver a tactical briefing. "Let's get this started," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been running plant operations since before half these people were hired. The first slide appeared behind him, charts, timelines, performance metrics. Most of them focused on the temporary efficiency drops that had occurred while my predictive system was being calibrated and tested across the pilot production lines. Over the last quarter, Howard began, pacing slowly across the front of the room like a prosecutor making his opening statement. "This division has experienced significant operational instability due to several experimental initiatives." He let that word experimental hang in the air like smoke from a defective machine. The numbers on screen told a story, but not the complete one. Every system implementation has growing pains. You don't overhaul decades of maintenance protocols without some temporary disruption. But Howard's presentation made it look like I'd driven a tank through a carefully orchestrated operation. Oliver Davis stepped forward next, his tablet connecting to the projector with a soft electronic chirp. "These performance fluctuations," he said, pointing at the screen with the confidence of someone presenting ironclad evidence, "suggest that current leadership initiatives may be creating unacceptable operational risk." Nobody asked where those numbers came from. Nobody questioned the timeframes or the context. The data was presented as fact, and in a room full of people already convinced of the conclusion, facts weren't really up for debate. Then Cassandra Whitfield stood up. The entire conference room went silent, the kind of silence you hear right before heavy machinery locks up and something expensive breaks. She walked deliberately to the center of the table and placed a single sheet of paper directly in front of me. Crisp white letterhead, formal corporate language, and 25 signatures arranged in neat rows like soldiers on a parade ground. I didn't need to read the document to know what it was, but I picked it up anyway. The header read, "Request for immediate leadership review, Operations Division." Below that, in carefully worded corporate speak, "Recommendation for the resignation of Mac Powell, effective immediately." Cassandra rested her palms flat on the polished table surface and looked down at me with the expression of someone who just played a winning hand. 25 people in this division believe operations would function more effectively under different leadership, she said, her voice calm and measured. Then she added, almost casually, frankly, "I'm surprised it took this long for concerns to surface." The room stayed dead quiet. Some people stared at their hands. Others found sudden interest in their laptop screens. A few glanced nervously between me and Cassandra, like they were watching a chess match where someone was about to lose their queen. I read every signature on that petition slowly, one by one, names of people I'd worked alongside for months. Supervisors who'd asked for help troubleshooting equipment problems, line workers who'd seemed genuinely interested in learning about predictive analytics. All of them now officially on record saying I should be gone. Then I folded the paper once, slipped it into my laptop bag, and zipped it shut. Cassandra watched my reaction carefully, waiting for something: anger, defensiveness, maybe a desperate attempt to explain myself. She didn't get any of that. The meeting dragged on for nearly 2 hours after that. Criticism dressed up as constructive feedback. Speculation presented as analytical assessment. One by one, department supervisors stood up to voice their concerns about the direction of operations under my leadership. Through all of it, I stayed quiet. Back in the Navy, we learned that sometimes the best response to an attack is no response at all. Let the enemy reveal their positions while you gather intelligence. When chairs finally started scraping across the floor and people began filing out, Cassandra remained behind. She watched me pack up my laptop and close my notebook with the careful attention of someone making sure a job gets finished properly. I picked up my gear, walked toward the door, then stopped just long enough to glance back at her. "Anything else you need to discuss?" I asked. Her response came with that same cold smile I'd seen during the meeting. "Just remember, Mac, resistance doesn't change reality. It only reveals who thinks they can control it." Fair enough, but she was about to learn something about reality that wasn't in any corporate manual. By the next morning, the operations floor had settled back into its normal rhythm. Machinery humming at optimal frequencies, diagnostic monitors cycling through their regular updates, maintenance crews moving efficiently between workstations. The petition hadn't changed the fundamental work that needed to get done. I settled in at my workstation and pulled up the predictive maintenance dashboard. 3 major production lines were currently running the pilot version of my system, lines 2, 5, and 7. Each had been selected for the same basic reason: high probability of catastrophic failure combined with critical importance to our biggest contracts. Together, those 3 lines represented more than $200 million in annual production capacity. If we lost them to equipment failures, BlueTech would be looking at massive contract penalties, delivery delays, and potentially some very serious safety incidents. Across the floor, Howard Thompson moved between workstations with the confident stride of someone who thought he'd just solved a major problem. Oliver Davis stayed close to his quality control station, reviewing reports on his tablet with obvious satisfaction. Both of them seemed to believe the same thing, that the early disruptions during system testing meant the whole project was headed for failure. What they didn't understand was that predictive maintenance systems often look like they're making things worse before they start making things better. It's like tearing down a wall to install better wiring, messy in the short term, but essential for long-term reliability. They weren't watching the dashboards the way I was. Late that afternoon, something shifted. Line 5 minus our heavy equipment assembly operation had been flagged for weeks with early warning signs of bearing deterioration in the main drive system. The kind of mechanical failure that typically announces itself by shutting down an entire production line for 3 days while you wait for replacement parts. But today, the diagnostic readings showed something different. Production efficiency was climbing. Output quality metrics were holding steady. Most importantly, the bearing temperature readings had stabilized within normal operational parameters. My system had identified the problem early enough for preventive maintenance to work. Instead of a catastrophic breakdown, we managed a controlled intervention. Across the factory floor, Howard was explaining to a group of supervisors why that productivity spike didn't mean anything. "One good day doesn't prove the system works," he said, gesturing dismissively toward the monitoring stations. "We've had equipment run fine for weeks before failing catastrophically." Oliver Davis nodded along, though I noticed his attention kept drifting toward the real-time diagnostic displays. The numbers weren't cooperating with their narrative. Every hour that passed, the performance indicators improved. Production rates, quality scores, equipment reliability, all trending upward. By early afternoon, Oliver's confidence had started showing cracks. If these trends continued long enough to reach the quarterly review, that petition they'd organized would look very different, not like a legitimate leadership concern, more like a coordinated attempt to remove the person who was actually protecting the company's most valuable production assets. And somewhere over the Atlantic, the one person who could change everything was already heading home. CEO Bradley Whitfield's plane was scheduled to land tomorrow morning, just in time for the quarterly review. I leaned back in my chair and watched the dashboard refresh again. Line 7 had just completed its most efficient production run in 6 months. The numbers didn't lie, even when people wanted them to. Late that evening, with most of the factory crew gone for the day, I was still at my workstation running final diagnostics when something caught my attention. A new alert had appeared on the main monitoring screen, not a problem alert, but a performance milestone notification. Total production efficiency across all 3 pilot lines, 250% improvement over baseline metrics. Equipment reliability, 97% uptime. Projected cost savings, $67 million in prevented downtime and emergency repairs. The system wasn't just working, it was exceeding every projection I'd made when Bradley hired me 6 months ago. I printed out the complete performance report and slipped it into the folder Bradley had left on my desk. Tomorrow's quarterly review was going to be interesting. Quarterly review meetings at BlueTech followed the same format every 3 months. The executive boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the main administrative building, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Detroit Industrial District. You could see the whole operation from up there: production facilities, shipping docks, the parking lots filled with pickup trucks and work vans. Every department presented their numbers in the same order. Every quarter: sales revenue, operational costs, production targets, quality metrics. Predictable, controlled, corporate. By the time the meeting convened that morning, Bradley Whitfield had already returned from Germany. He entered the boardroom carrying a coffee mug and looking slightly tired from international travel, but his eyes were sharp and focused. This was a man who'd built Blue Tech from a small machine shop into a major manufacturing operation. He didn't miss details. "Let's get started," he said, settling into his chair at the head of the polished conference table. One by one, division leaders took their turn at the presentation screen. Sales reported moderate growth in new contracts. Quality control highlighted steady output numbers across most production lines. Finance presented cost reduction initiatives that had saved the company nearly $3 million over the past quarter. All routine, all within expected parameters. Then the screen shifted to the next item on the agenda: Operations Division Performance Review. I stood up and connected my tablet to the projection system. The folder Bradley had left on my desk 3 weeks earlier sat beside my laptop, along with the printed performance reports from yesterday's monitoring session. The first slide appeared on the screen behind me, large bold numbers against a dark background: 250% efficiency improvement, pilot program results. For several seconds, nobody in the boardroom spoke. A few executives leaned forward in their chairs. The CFO reached for his reading glasses and pulled the printed reports closer. Bradley Whitfield studied the numbers with the focused attention of someone reading a tactical assessment. "These results look impressive," he said slowly. Then his eyes shifted from the screen to me. "Walk us through what this means." I advanced to the next slide, keeping the technical explanation straightforward. The predictive maintenance system monitored patterns in equipment behavior: vibration signatures, temperature fluctuations, electrical load variations. When these patterns indicated developing problems, the system generated alerts that gave our maintenance teams time to intervene before catastrophic failures occurred. 3 major production lines had been selected for the pilot program. Lines 2, 5, and 7 minus, all critical to our largest contracts, all showing signs of declining reliability before the system implementation. The results spoke for themselves. Line 5 had avoided a bearing failure that would have shut down heavy equipment assembly for at least 72 hours. Line 2 had identified hydraulic system degradation early enough for scheduled maintenance instead of emergency repairs. Line 7 had optimized its operational parameters to achieve record production efficiency. Combined impact: $67 million in prevented downtime, avoided emergency repair costs, and increased production capacity. Several board members exchanged glances across the table. Howard Thompson, who'd been invited to observe as operations manager, sat perfectly still in his chair. Oliver Davis stared at the presentation screen like he was trying to find errors in the data. Bradley Whitfield rested his elbows on the table and studied the final summary slide. "These numbers suggest we've not only solved our equipment reliability problems," he said, "but actually improved our production capacity beyond previous capabilities." The CFO nodded once. "The financial impact is substantial. This level of efficiency improvement translates to significant competitive advantage." For a moment, it looked like the meeting might simply move on to the next agenda item. Standard corporate process: review the data, acknowledge the success, implement the system company-wide. That's when I reached into my laptop bag and pulled out the folded petition. The paper made a soft sound as it landed on the polished conference table. Bradley Whitfield's attention immediately shifted from the presentation screen to the document in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "A document that circulated through operations 3 days ago," I said. Bradley picked up the petition and unfolded it carefully. At first, his expression showed mild curiosity, probably expecting some routine administrative paperwork. Then his eyes began moving down the page. 1 name, 2 names, 5/10/25. The header text was written in formal corporate language: request for immediate leadership review, Operations Division. Recommendation: Mac Powell's resignation, effective immediately. Bradley Whitfield read through the entire document slowly, his expression becoming more serious with each signature. When he finished, he placed the petition flat on the table and looked around the boardroom. His gaze stopped at Cassandra Whitfield, seated near the far end of the conference table. The silence in the room stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. No one spoke. Not Howard, not Oliver, not a single board member. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Finally, Bradley broke the silence. When he spoke, his voice remained calm and controlled, but there was an edge underneath that made the question sound like an interrogation. "Who authorized this petition?" The question hung in the air, like the moment before a crane cable snaps under too much weight. Nobody rushed to answer Bradley's question. Several executives shuffled through their printed reports, suddenly finding the financial projections extremely interesting. Howard Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Oliver Davis studied his hands like they contained classified information. Both men looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Bradley Whitfield leaned back in his executive chair, still holding the petition. His gaze moved methodically around the table before settling on his wife. Cassandra? For the first time since I'd known her, Cassandra Whitfield seemed to search for words. It was a legitimate leadership concern, she said carefully. Several people in operations expressed frustration with the disruptions Mac's implementation was causing. Disruptions, Bradley repeated slowly, glancing back at the presentation screen where my results were still displayed. You mean the disruptions that just prevented $67 million in equipment failures? The CFO cleared his throat. The timeline here is worth noting, he said, consulting his copy of my technical report. According to these documents, the petition was organized before the system had sufficient operational data to demonstrate effectiveness. That observation landed like a wrench dropped on a concrete floor. Board members began flipping through their reports with renewed interest, comparing dates and performance metrics. Oliver Davis finally spoke up. Look, the early implementation phase showed real problems: productivity dips, workflow confusion, crew frustration. Those were legitimate concerns. Temporary implementation issues, the CFO corrected, standard for any major system upgrade. The question is whether leadership was given adequate time to demonstrate results before being asked to resign. Bradley Whitfield set the petition down and picked up my performance summary. According to this data, Mac's system identified critical equipment failures weeks before they would have occurred. Line 5's bearing problems alone would have cost us 3 days of production downtime and $250,000 in emergency repairs. He looked directly at Howard. How long have you been recommending we replace that bearing assembly? Howard's face reddened. We were planning to address it during the next scheduled maintenance window, which was when? Next month. So Mac's system prevented a catastrophic failure that your traditional maintenance schedule would have missed entirely. Howard had no response to that. Bradley turned his attention back to Cassandra. You organized a petition to remove someone whose system had already started protecting our most valuable production assets? The concerns were raised by operations staff. Cassandra said, her voice becoming defensive. I was simply facilitating their feedback through proper HR channels, by bypassing standard performance review procedures and calling for immediate resignation. The chairman of the board, who'd been observing everything in silence, finally spoke up. This situation requires immediate clarification. His tone carried the weight of someone who'd been making corporate decisions since before most people in the room were born. What followed was swift and decisive. Cassandra Whitfield was removed from all operational responsibilities within BlueTech Manufacturing, effective immediately. Her position as VP of Human Resources was terminated, and the board voted to eliminate the role entirely rather than replace her. Howard Thompson and Oliver Davis were demoted from their management positions pending a full review of their conduct during the petition incident. Both men would return to supervisor roles under new department leadership. The room stayed silent while these decisions were announced. Corporate justice moves fast when the evidence is clear and the financial stakes are high. Bradley Whitfield then turned his attention back to me. You built a system that's already protecting some of our most critical production capabilities, he said. The board agrees it's time to give you the authority to implement this company-wide. The proposal passed without debate. A new division would be created within BlueTech, Predictive Operations Excellence. I'd be running it with full authority to deploy predictive maintenance across all production facilities. 6 months later, the factory floor operates like a different place entirely. The Predictive Operations Excellence Division has expanded from 3 pilot lines to oversight of the entire manufacturing operation. Our systems now monitor dozens of production lines, identifying equipment problems weeks before they can impact production or worker safety. Efficiency numbers across BlueTech have not just stabilized, they've improved beyond what anyone thought possible. For the first time in years, our production capacity is growing instead of declining. We're taking on larger contracts, meeting tighter deadlines, and doing it all while maintaining the safest working environment in the company's history. Most days, I'm too busy reviewing diagnostic reports and coordinating maintenance schedules to think about the petition that started this whole situation. But sometimes, walking through the executive corridor, I'll spot a familiar figure near the lobby windows. Cassandra occasionally shows up to meet with attorneys or handle paperwork related to her departure settlement. She moves differently now, less confident, more cautious. The authority she once wielded like a surgical instrument has been permanently removed. Last week, I watched her standing by those same windows, staring out at the production facilities where her petition had tried to remove me. Her phone buzzed in her hand, Bradley's name on the caller ID. She looked at the display for a long moment, then declined the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. Some conversations aren't worth having anymore. At the far end of the corridor, my office door bears new lettering, Predictive Operations Excellence Director, Mac Powell. Behind that door, the people who once signed a petition demanding my resignation now send me their maintenance reports and equipment diagnostics. The system corrected itself just like I knew it would. Direct address to reader. Here's what I learned from this whole situation, and maybe it'll help you if you ever find yourself in similar circumstances. When people try to remove you from a position where you're doing good work, don't waste energy fighting the politics. Focus on the results. Let your competence speak louder than their complaints. In manufacturing and business and life, the numbers don't lie even when people want them to. If you're genuinely solving problems and creating value, the system will eventually recognize that. It might take time and the process might be uncomfortable, but merit has a way of winning in the end. Stay focused on the mission, trust your expertise, and let the results prove who was right. Sometimes the most dangerous thing your enemies can do is attack you right before you succeed.